The morning began like any other in Evelyn Marlowe's quiet life. At 71, her days had taken on the texture of polished stone. Smooth, familiar, sometimes cold. She lived alone in a weathered house perched on a sloping ridge of Oregon pine, just above a river she once swam in barefoot, decades ago. The windows were large but rarely opened, the curtains sheer but almost always drawn. She told herself it was to keep the heat out, but even in winter they remained closed. Evelyn's world had shrunk after Martin passed. Her husband of nearly 50 years had been the last witness to a life fully lived. Dances in summer barns, babies born in the backseat of a Ford during a snowstorm, kisses stolen in grocery aisles. When he died, it was like the sound in her world lowered. Conversations became quieter, visits shorter. Her 3 grown children called on Sundays, but the echo after the line went dead was often the longest conversation she had all week. But Evelyn was not bitter. Loneliness hadn't hardened her, it had hollowed her gently, like water shaping stone. She still smiled at her reflection in the hallway mirror. She still lit candles at night, even when there was no one to see them. She even still wore the red silk robe Martin gave her on their 40th anniversary. It hung on her thin frame now, looser than it once was, but it still made her feel something close to visible. That robe was what she wore the morning everything shifted. She had just stepped out of the shower, the towel wrapped around her damp silver hair. The steam had fogged up the mirror, and for a moment she admired the hazy version of herself, softened, almost dreamlike. She slipped into the robe without tying it and walked across the room to open the curtains. Something she hadn't done in years. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the warmth of late spring. Maybe it was the music she had left playing from an old jazz vinyl downstairs. Or maybe it was that something inside her had quietly reached a point of no return. As she stood there, robe open, skin kissed by sunlight, she felt a rare and quiet power. Vulnerable but not ashamed. It wasn't about seduction, not at 71. It was about recognition. Of herself, of her life, of the shape time had carved from flesh and memory. And that's when she saw him. Across the ridge, far off, nearly imperceptible, was a man painting on a deck. A small figure, maybe a neighbor, maybe a stranger. He looked up and froze. They were too far apart to speak, but close enough to lock eyes. Evelyn gasped and stepped back, clutching the robe shut. Her heart pounded. Breath caught somewhere in her chest. But then, she didn't feel panic. She felt awake. Later that day, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Not the embarrassment but the spark. The way that simple, unguarded moment cracked something open in her. She went looking for her old art supplies that afternoon. Brushes, half-dried paints, a sketchbook yellowed with time. She hadn't painted in nearly a decade. Martin had been the artist in the family. But Evelyn remembered how it used to feel to lose herself in shape and shadow. She sat by the window and began. First, her hands trembled. Then her strokes steadied. It didn't matter that the lines were crude, the shading uneven. What mattered was that she saw again. The light, the color, the outline of her own still beating existence. Days passed. She painted every afternoon now. Not landscapes but moments. A steaming teacup, the folds of her robe, the way sunlight bent across her floorboards. She began wearing the robe often, even during the day. She liked the feel of it against her skin. It reminded her that softness hadn't abandoned her. Then one Thursday a note arrived at her door. I hope this isn't too forward. I live across the ridge. I wasn't trying to invade your privacy the other day. But I wanted to say, the way the light hit you standing there like that, it reminded me why I started painting. Thank you. It was signed only, K. Evelyn folded the note with trembling hands. She pressed it to her chest, eyes glistening, lips parting in a silent smile. She didn't reply, not at first. But she began painting with a new energy. Her world, once muffled, began to sing again. Weeks turned to months. Kay never sent another note, and Evelyn never saw him again. But it didn't matter. That moment, that glance, That unguarded sliver of vulnerability had cracked her open and poured something vibrant inside. She began leaving the curtains open. She played jazz every morning. She painted herself into the corners of her own life again, filling the house with the scent of turpentine and hope. And sometimes, when the light was just right, she wore the red robe untied. Not for anyone else, but for herself.